Good morning and welcome to The Current. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Ethiopian prosecutors think they've got a big fish, a man they insist is a key player in the Ogaden liberation movement. In their words, a terrorist. He's Ethiopian, but he's also Canadian. And Bashir Makhtal's family and supporters here say there are more than a few inconsistencies in the case against him. They've got the attention of the Canadian government. Now they want Canada's intervention. That is where The Current begins today. Well, Bashir Makhtal was in an open courtroom in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa today. He's a dual Ethiopian and Canadian citizen, and he spent more than 2 years in an Ethiopian prison as a domestic terror suspect. Mr. Makhtal was picked up along the border between Kenya and Somalia in December of 2006. He was then forced onto a rendition flight and flown illegally across international borders, eventually landing in an Ethiopian prison cell. He was not allowed to see Canadian consular officials for more than a year and a half, and he did not actually meet with his lawyer until about 2 months ago. Ethiopia accuses Mr. Makhtal of being a key figure in the ONLF, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, a rebel group that's fighting for more autonomy or outright secession from Ethiopia. Ethiopia considers the ONLF to be a terrorist organization, but it is not on the terror watch list in Canada or in the United States. David McGuffin is following Bashir Makhtal's trial. He's CBC's Africa correspondent, and he's in Addis Ababa. Good morning.
Hi.
David, first of all, tell us, how did Bashir Makhtal seem? What did he look like in court today?
He looked very good. He looked healthy. He seemed strong. He seemed in good spirits. He was talking with the other people around him. I very briefly, as he was walking out, had a chance to ask him how he was doing. He said, "I'm fine." He's asked through his lawyer to spread the message to his family that he is doing quite well. What little we could see and what little contact we had with him, he does seem to be doing pretty well.
And what happened in court today?
Well, it was a very brief session. This was meant to be the kickoff of the prosecution's case against Bashir Makhtal, and they were meant to produce 6 key witnesses again in this case who are going to bring evidence, they said, proving that Bashir Makhtal is a member of the Ogaden National Liberation Front, the liberation movement in the Somali part of Ethiopia. Not one of these 6 witnesses showed up. The prosecution said it was just too difficult to get them here on time, that they were coming from a town up on the Somali border called Jijiga, and they just weren't able to get them down here. Jijiga is about 600 kilometers away. I mean, it's not close, but they've had more than a month to get them down here. So there does seem to be some suggestion that these are delaying tactics by the prosecution, and that the judges did give them a hard time about this, but they have now postponed the case for another month. Bashir's last appearance in court, where he pled not guilty on the charges against him, was a month ago. He's now back for a couple hours today, and then it won't be another month before we see him again. So things are really continuing to drag on in this case.
Were there any Canadian officials there monitoring what they thought was going to be the start of that trial then?
There were several from the embassy, including a political officer and a representative from CEDA here, the aid agency as well, and a couple of local employees, Ethiopian employees as well, doing translation. They had some issues actually to bring up themselves, which they brought up through Makhtal's lawyer. They have been having what they describe as complications in getting access to Bashir in prison. They say that basically, from what we understand, the embassy isn't talking directly to us, but from what we understand, they haven't been able to see him for a month since his last court date, effectively, that they've been blocked from getting access to him. Under international law, let alone Ethiopian law, they should have full access as a Canadian national, as a foreign national in prison. Their embassy should have free access to him, and they're not getting that access. The judges basically said that they should have access, and that they've asked that they be given access. So whether that happens or not is still an open question.
You say the judges. How many judges?
There are 3 judges sitting on this case, and at least one of them has a reputation of handling very difficult political cases, and is known as a bit of a hardliner, so which may play a factor in this as well.
Well, what are the specific charges he faces?
He's up on 4 specific charges. The main one, I guess, is that he is a member of the Ogaden National Liberation Front, which is, as I mentioned, this rebel group in the Somali part of Ethiopia, that he, as a key member of that group, is trying to overthrow the government of Ethiopia. There are other charges linked to this, that he actually ran training bases for for ONLF military groups, that he worked with neighboring Eritrea and in Somalia with the Islamic Courts Union, the government that used to be there, that was a very Islamist radical government there, in training and setting up these bases. He's also been accused of being a key financier for the ONLF as well. What's new in this case today is that the defense is actually now admitting that he is or was a member of the ONLF. They had not been saying this in the past, which seems to suggest that the government probably does have some evidence linking him. Their defense, though, is that Bashir Makhtal's grandfather was one of the founders of the ONLF. He never actively joined the ONLF. His name was put on a list of members of the Central Committee of the ONLF. He asked repeatedly to have it removed, and it was finally removed in 2006. So he's saying, well, yes, he was a member, and certainly is sympathetic to the ONLF. He is not and never has been an active member, and that's their defense. Okay,
and so that's the difference, because the government's basically saying that he was training fighters, he was much more involved.
Yeah, much more. I mean, literally, and they've named bases that he worked out of numbers of troops, 800 people that he trained to fight against the Ethiopian government. I mean, there's very, very specific charges they're laying against him. But again, they've now had him for over 2 years, and today is just another example of the fact that they seem unable to bring these key bits of evidence to court to actually prove this.
Now, these charges that he faces, what kind of sentence do those charges carry?
It could be the death penalty if he's found to be guilty in the highest degree on any of these 4 charges, actually. They range from 10 years to the death sentence on all 4 charges, though. So it's certainly a serious case. Talking to people who are close to the case, too, they don't think that the Ethiopian government is going to let this one slip away from them. One person said the Ethiopian government thinks they have a big fish here. They think specifically, is what I understand, is that Bashir Makhtal was one of the main financiers of the ONLF, again, something him and his family deny. And they suggest that since he's been captured, the ONLF has actually had some real financing problems. I don't have evidence of that, but this is what we're hearing through sources that link to the government.
Well, his supporters in Canada accuse the judicial system in Ethiopia of being little more than a kangaroo court and have really raised doubts whether he will get a fair trial. How well-founded are those concerns?
Yeah, I think the Ethiopian justice system is pretty well known for having a lot of political interference in it. I mean, I think that's been pointed out by human rights groups who've studied it. So I think there's quite a bit of justification in that. And I think, too, if you look at the Ogaden issue where the Somali population lives, the Human Rights Watch, a lot of different groups have put out reports saying that there's been widespread torture, use of electrocution on prisoners, and forced confessions. And so, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about the evidence that's going to come up against Bashir Makhtal in this case, specifically because of what we know about how evidence is gathered in this country, let alone how politicized the court system is.
Now, again, they've had him for quite a while. He's gone to trial today, and it ended quickly. So what happens next?
Well, the next date is apparently April 20th, and Bashir Makhtal's lawyer is saying that if everything goes to plan, he expects this case will last about 3 months from now. So it's still got some ways to go. Okay,
David McGuffin, thank you.
Thank you.
David McGuffin is CBC's Africa correspondent. We reached him in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia today.